Well, how's it going? Let's just dive straight in. I'm gonna use your best lap, which looks like it was pretty early in the session, and we'll go from there. In general, looks pretty good. Just in a couple of spots where you're less familiar with the corners going this direction, you're turning in early, but overall pretty good. Here, just simple, easy stuff. Using all the road to the left, trying to straighten out more entry into the first corner here. Uh, Maybe letting it a little further out to the left to give you a better run out of the second corner. So getting a little bit closer to this corner and carrying enough momentum through that first corner that it wants to go out to this track out curb a little bit. And that way you've got a straighter run out to the outside. It may be a little bit slower going right through the middle here because you have to sharpen it up. If you get out wider, you have to turn sharper to come back to corner two, but it'll give you a much better run out of the corner here and lengthen the straightaway a bit. This corner, one of the downhill off camber blind corners, really tricky for sure. In general, I would say it looks pretty good. The biggest thing is you don't want to be too late turning in because it is downhill and off camber. So you start to lose grip getting out wide. If anything, maybe slightly earlier turn in and get kind of treated as a double apex. So get pretty close to the curb early on. Right along in here, you might come just a couple feet off, through the middle here, and then come back towards the second late apex. So right in there, kind of a second clip, but otherwise pretty good. Likewise, turning in here, pretty good. Just make sure we pause a little longer out here by this exit curve on the left. So again, we want to make sure we maximize the speed up the hill. And because you've got all this grip, from it going uphill late, we don't want to turn in down here where it's more flat. We want to wait until a little bit higher up and do that little later turn in. We don't want to be getting to the curb too early here because then we're still going past the apex with lots of steering angle trying to straighten it up. We want to be, let me get my little pin. So rather than kind of coming in tight here and then having to turn the car once we get past the curb, we want to be turning the car harder, but coming from over here. And that way we're already aimed up the straightaway, kind of clipping it nearer to this cone up the hill. Again, that just makes sure we get back to full power as soon as possible, lengthen that straightaway out. All that. So a little bit later turning in here, a little more patience, just to make sure we get the full power. And then this one's also really tricky because it's, we can't see all the way through and there's big elevation changes all the way. So, it's kind of flat still, just a little bit uphill here, but obviously very uphill later into the corner. And so we want to take advantage of where all that grip is. And if we turn in earlier down here on the flat, then we can't really turn the car because we'll get too close to the apex up the hill. We want to drive longer on throttle, straighter longer, and then use the uphill to turn the car. So wait a little bit closer to this grass and it'll feel really wide, but then because it's so uphill, the car will turn really quickly. And then again, we'll be later apexing up here so that we get further left for the crest and set up that right onto the next straight. So yeah, just really prioritize looking for those late apexes to make sure we get back to power nice and early. When you get to the curb early like this before that cone, then you're waiting on power, and it pushes you out to the right a little bit. You got to get off throttle to be able to get back. So it ruins some of the run in the sequence. And most importantly, this corner leading on the straightaway leaves us a little bit early coming in here. So same thing, just a little bit on the later side turning in so that we're adding power and straightening the wheel as we come through. Just look real close at the steering angle. So we kind of turn in, we're like 40 something, 50, 55. I think I saw it up a little bit higher than that after. Yeah, so you're adding more and more. You're going past the apex, still adding up into 80s. I think, yeah, it all maxes out around 90 or so. And you're still, now you're almost all the way to track out. Now you're starting to open it up and start to go to power once we get closer to straight. But we want that to happen earlier. So before the apex is when we should see our max steering angle. But we can't do that if we're this far right on track. We want to be a little bit further left, a little bit wider entry. That way we can turn the wheel harder at the initial turn in and do all, have that 90, 80, 70 degree steering angle way back here before we get to the apex. And then once we get up here, we'll be opening as soon as we leave the apex. So you'll have that 50 or whatever at the apex and then like 40, 30, 20, getting less and less earlier in the corner, and that means you get back to power earlier, because we can't be, carrying that 90 degrees of steering input and trying to go to full power. And so we're just trying to lengthen that straightaway by doing the cornering early in the process and straightening as soon as we can to get back to full power. So that'll lengthen this whole straightaway, give us a much faster run up the hill here. I think this next corner looked pretty good. I don't remember any issues. This was a pretty good later apex, getting it nice and tight. So good job not getting in too tight too early, get nice and tight right at the end of the curb. All that looks really good. Pretty good here. I think that cone draws your eyes over a little too early. I'd say they actually have it placed a little too early for going this direction. And there were a couple like that where I think the cone is messing you up a little bit. You do want to clip it more towards the end here, which you kind of do, but you sort of turn in twice. You turn in, kind of aim towards the cone, straighten up, and then turn a second time to just make sure you're not too early on that. But pretty happy through all this sector here. Good apex, out to the outside, smooth on the steering and everything. All that's really good. Should be able to get probably a little burst of full power here, almost there. And then same here, a little bit sooner. We're starting to see that track out. We should be starting to unwind the wheel. We want to try to get to full power here just a little bit sooner, make this straightaway a little longer, pretty much wait until we're almost to the exit. And then this is another tricky one, kind of blind, can't see where you're going. If anything, we want to wait a little bit to make sure that we're nice and late so that we get that good drive off. This was a really good lap. Some of the other ones you were in tighter to that cone. And again, I think this is one that's placed a little bit too early for going this direction. And so if you get down there tight to that cone right in here, then you've got to go over this curb to not run out of space, or like open it and slow it down. So you do want to be a little bit later up here towards just a couple stripes after that cone they have placed, which I think you do pretty well on this lap. A couple of them you were a little bit earlier turning in. So it looks like probably the best indicator on the way in, when you can't really see where you're going, you basically want to wait till the end of that green, basically about the time the track starts going downhill. Maybe not all the way to the end of the red and white stripes, but certainly after the one board. So that leaves us somewhere around where the end of this AstroTurf or whatever it is here. And that'll leave you good timing to get down there towards the end of this curb, and then again be able to use that track out, which you do pretty well here. This looks pretty good, but I would think you should be able to carry power more up the hill with all that grip going uphill. I think you can probably be pretty close to full throttle, if not all the way to full throttle. And again, a little bit of patience, should be pretty close to the end of that curve before we turn in. You're starting to cut in a little bit early, which is why I think you have to kind of hesitate on the throttle to make sure you don't over rotate. And then again, up in here, this double apex looks pretty good. Nice apex there, all the way out left, nice and smooth inputs. All this I like. This looks really good. And then down here in the final chicane, overall looks pretty good. This first one, I would say we can carry a little bit more entry speed, probably turn in with a little bit of trail braking, because it is a pretty slow one, downhill, pretty good speed coming in. So we want to make sure that we're keeping some weight on the front, and probably a little bit later with the braking down the hill, but a little bit later with the release of the brake. So we want to be a little bit longer between where we release the brake and go to the throttle. If you feel like you can come off the brake, go straight to the throttle, that should be a cue to yourself that you've overslowed the corner a little bit. There should be enough speed carrying in that we can't go straight back to throttle. And we want to make sure we're back to throttle after we've reached our max steering angle. And I'll bet you we add a little bit here. So we're at 74 degrees of steering angle, 77, 78. Not too bad. And you start to open up there, but you're off throttle, and then adding kind of the second time. And so we want to be able to carry in, again, a little bit later on the brakes so that we release brakes a little bit later. So this whole process, we have the car balanced on the nose a little more as we're turning in. As we're increasing this steering angle, we should still have a little bit of brake, which we do initially. We just want a little bit more of that. And then if you watch your brake light, it goes from off right here to immediately on throttle, and so we want there to be a little bit of a delay because you're carrying so much speed in that you can't go straight back to throttle. That should be a little bit closer to the apex where we're going to throttle. And then line wise, once we get into this next corner right here, we probably want to be like 3 feet more to the right, call it half a car width. That way we can late apex this one, get back to power, or use a bigger chunk of this curb to try to straighten it out. So if you're this far left, we need to kind of cheat and use that curb a little bit. We're only just barely touching it, but you can get up into that green section and that really straightens the drive out, and then helps us with getting the power cleanly going through. So right there, we want to make sure we're basically full throttle as soon as we come off that apex curb. And right now it's, a couple of car lengths. So it should be like right in there somewhere here. You're like tipped into throttle, shouldn't need that second brake. And then right in here, as soon as you start coming off that apex, because it should be a little bit later on the apex, you should be able to unwind your steering sooner, be able to commit to full throttle a lot earlier. So in big general terms, I think on this track, you started to creep towards a little bit too early apex, and those that you're not familiar with. So focus on going back to a little bit later, getting that good drive off the corner. Remember, these cars accelerate really well, but we've got to be able to get the wheel straight to do that. And so you got to get the car turned earlier in the corner to be able to straight line the exit and get to power sooner. So hopefully that helps you out. Let me know how it goes next time, and have some fun. Thanks.